The courtroom air crackled thick with whispers and veiled glances. All eyes were on the woman in the witness stand. A vision in a bespoke Dior dress, a dress Amelia recognized with a sickening jolt. It was hers, a birthday gift from her husband, now seated beside his mistress, Kimberly, who wore the stolen garment like a queen claiming her throne. The gavel fell the judge's voice, a distant drone, as Amelia's world crumbled. But just as the final judgment was about to be passed, the heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway, his presence commanding an immediate, breathless silence. He was a ghost from a past. Amelia thought long buried, and his first words would shatter everything they thought they knew. The chill of the courtroom wasn't just from the overzealous air conditioning. It was the icy dread coiling in Amelia's stomach. She sat at the plaintiff's table, her lawyer a harried man named Mr. Peterson shuffling through papers that seemed to shrink with every rustle. Across the aisle, her husband, Richard Donovan, oozed a smug confidence that made her skin crawl. And beside him, preening under the courtroom lights, was Kimberly Sinclair. Kimberly. The name itself was a venomous whisper in Amelia's mind. Today, Kimberly had outdone herself. She was wearing the dress. Not just any dress. It was a one-of-a-kind Christian Dior, a deep sapphire blue silk that had been Amelia's 35th birthday present from Richard. He'd told her she was his queen, his everything, as he'd fastened the delicate diamond clasp at her nape. Now that same dress hugged Kimberly's curves, a blatant, audacious declaration of victory. "She's wearing my dress, Mr. Peterson." Amelia whispered, her voice trembling. "I know, Amelia. It's a power play, a despicable one." "Try to ignore it," he murmured back, his focus on the judge. A stern-faced woman named Judge Harrington. Ignore it. How could she ignore the public spectacle of her own life being stolen and worn by another woman? The dress was a symbol of everything she had lost: her marriage, her home, her dignity. Richard and Kimberly were fighting to leave her with nothing, claiming she had been a frivolous, spendthrift wife who contributed nothing to their marital assets. It was a lie, a carefully constructed narrative to strip her of her rightful share. Richard's lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit named Bartholomew, was painting a vivid picture of Amelia as a gold digger. He presented credit card statements, receipts for expensive suit treatments, and vacation photos, all twisted to look like reckless spending rather than the shared life of a wealthy couple. Amelia had dedicated 15 years to Richard, supporting his ambitions, hosting his business partners, and creating a home that was the envy of their social circle. She had been the perfect corporate wife, a role she had played with grace and dedication. Now she was being portrayed as a parasite. The final blow came when Bartholomew called Kimberly to the stand. She glided past Amelia's table, the sapphire silk rustling softly, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She settled into the witness chair, crossing her legs with a deliberate slowness that drew every eye to the dress. Miss Sinclair Bartholomew, began his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Can you tell the court about your relationship with Mr. Donovan?" "Richard and I have a deep and loving connection," Kimberly said, her voice a saccharine melody that made Amelia's teeth ache. He was so unhappy in his marriage. He felt trapped, unappreciated. She cast a sorrowful glance towards Amelia. He just wanted to be with someone who truly saw him, who loved him for who he is, not for his money. Lies. All of it. Amelia had loved Richard with a fierce and unwavering devotion long before he had made his first million. They had started with nothing, two ambitious young people with dreams as big as the city skyline. She had been his rock, his confidant, his biggest cheerleader. "And this dress you're wearing?" "Miss Sinclair," Bartholomew continued, his tone casual. "It's quite stunning." "A gift from Mr. Donovan, I presume?" Kimberly's smile widened. "Yes. Richard has impeccable taste. He loves to spoil me." Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt the blood drain from her face. The audacity of it, the sheer cruelty was breathtaking. She looked at Richard silently, pleading with him to have a shred of decency to stop this charade. He wouldn't meet her gaze. He just stared at Kimberly with a look of adoration that had once been reserved for her. Judge Harrington, who had been observing the proceedings with a stony expression, finally intervened. "Counselor, the provenance of the witness's attire is hardly relevant to the division of marital assets. With all due respect, Your Honor." Bartholomew countered smoothly. "It speaks to my client's generosity and the nature of his relationship with Miss Sinclair. It demonstrates that their connection is not a fleeting affair, but a committed partnership, where he provides for her needs and desires just as he did for Mrs. Donovan during their marriage. He is a provider, a man of means who is more than capable of managing his own finances without the interference of his soon-to-be ex-wife." The argument was flimsy, a pathetic attempt at character assassination. But in the emotionally charged atmosphere of the courtroom, it was having its intended effect. The whispers grew louder. Amelia could feel the judgmental stares of the people in the gallery. She was losing. She was losing everything. Mr. Peterson did his best on cross-examination, but Kimberly was a skilled actress. She played the part of the devoted, heartbroken lover to perfection, shedding a single glistening tear at just the right moment. By the time she stepped down, Amelia's case felt hopeless. Judge Harrington looked at the clock on the wall. "We will hear the final arguments after a short recess. I expect to deliver my judgment before the end of the day." The recess was torture. Amelia sat alone, Mr. Peterson having gone to confer with a colleague. Richard and Kimberly were huddled together, whispering and laughing, occasionally glancing over at her with undisguised contempt. Amelia felt a profound sense of loneliness, a despair so deep it threatened to swallow her whole. She had no one. Her family lived on the other side of the country, and her friends, the ones she had shared with Richard, had all chosen his side. The courtroom doors creaked open, but Amelia didn't look up. It was probably just the bailiff. Then a shadow fell over her table. "Amelia." The voice was a ghost from a lifetime ago, a voice she had never expected to hear again. She looked up, her heart stopping in her chest. Standing before her was Alexander Sterling, not the lanky, idealistic boy she had known in college, but a man who radiated an aura of power and authority. He was dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than her car, his dark hair impeccably styled, his eyes the color of a stormy sea fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "What are you doing here?" He gave her a small, sad smile. "I heard you were in some trouble. I came to help." Before Amelia could process his words, Judge Harrington re-entered the courtroom, and everyone rose. The final act of her public humiliation was about to begin. "We will now hear the final arguments," the judge announced. Bartholomew strode to the center of the courtroom, his voice booming with confidence as he summarized his case, painting Richard as the victim and Amelia as the villain. Then it was Mr. Peterson's turn. He did his best, his voice earnest and pleading, but his words felt hollow, a desperate attempt to salvage a sinking ship. As Mr. Peterson finished, Judge Harrington looked at the documents before her, her expression unreadable. After reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimonies, "I am prepared to make my ruling." Amelia's heart pounded in her ears. This was it, the end of her life as she knew it. In the matter of Donovan versus Donovan, the judge began, her voice crisp and final. "I find that the marital assets, including the primary residence, the vacation properties, and the majority of the investment portfolio, were acquired through the sole efforts of Mr. Richard Donovan. Therefore, I rule in favor of the defendant." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Richard and Kimberly exchanged a triumphant glance. Amelia felt the floor drop out from beneath her. But before the judge could continue, Alexander Sterling, who had been standing quietly at the back of the courtroom, strode forward. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "But there has been a grave misunderstanding." Judge Harrington looked at him over the rim of her glasses, her expression one of stern disapproval. "And you are?" "My name is Alexander Sterling," he said, "and I am the rightful owner of everything Mr. Donovan claims as his own." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Richard's face went white as a sheet. Kimberly's jaw dropped, and Amelia could only stare at Alexander, her mind reeling in disbelief. The billionaire ghost from her past had just walked back into her life, and he was about to change everything. 15 years earlier, Amelia had stood on the sun-drenched steps of a small, ivy-covered chapel, her hand in Richard Donovan's. He was a man with a hunger in his eyes, a relentless ambition that both thrilled and terrified her. They had met in a crowded city bar, a chance encounter that felt like destiny. He was a junior stockbroker with dreams of conquering Wall Street, and she was a budding art curator with a passion for beauty and a quiet strength he found captivating. One day, Amelia, he had whispered to her on their third date as they looked out over the glittering city from a rooftop bar, "All of this will be ours." She had believed him. She had believed in him. She had given up her own career aspirations to support his pouring her energy into creating a life for them. A home that would be a sanctuary from the cutthroat world he was so determined to conquer. The first few years were a whirlwind of long hours and take-out dinners eaten on the floor of their tiny apartment. Amelia became his sounding board, his strategist, his unwavering support system. She proofread his reports, helped him prepare for presentations, and hosted dinner parties for his superiors, charming them with her intelligence and grace. And as Richard's career soared, so did their lifestyle. The tiny apartment gave way to a sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park. The takeout dinners were replaced by reservations at the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Their life became a gilded cage, a beautiful prison of social obligations and corporate events. Amelia played her part to perfection. She was the epitome of the elegant, supportive wife. She managed their homes, organized their social calendar, and curated an art collection that was the envy of their peers. But somewhere along the way, she had lost herself. The vibrant, passionate art curator had been subsumed by the polished, perfect Mrs. Donovan. The cracks in their marriage began to appear slowly. Hairline fractures that Amelia tried to ignore. Richard became more distant, more consumed by his work. The late nights at the office became more frequent, the business trips longer. The easy intimacy they had once shared was replaced by a polite formality. Amelia tried to talk to him to bridge the growing chasm between them, but he would always dismiss her concerns with a wave of his hand. "Don't worry, darling. Everything's fine. I'm just under a lot of pressure at work." She wanted to believe him. She clung to the memory of the ambitious young man with the hungry eyes, the man who had promised her the world. But deep down, she knew that something was wrong. The first time she saw the name Kimberly Sinclair was on a credit card statement, a charge for a ridiculously expensive lingerie set from a boutique Amelia had never heard of. When she confronted Richard, he had a ready explanation. "It was a gift for my new assistant," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "A thank you for all her hard work. You know how it is, Amelia. You have to keep your staff happy." She had let it go, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. But the name kept reappearing. A hotel booking in a city where Richard had no business. A restaurant reservation for 2 on a night he was supposed to be working late. The final irrefutable proof came in the form of an anonymous email. It contained a single attachment, a photo of Richard and Kimberly, their arms wrapped around each other, kissing on a sun-drenched beach. The date stamp on the photo was from a week ago, a week when Richard was supposedly at a business conference in Tokyo. The betrayal was a physical blow knocking the air from her lungs. The life she had so carefully built, the gilded cage she had willingly inhabited, was a lie. The confrontation was explosive. Richard, for the first time in their marriage, dropped the charming facade. He was cold, ruthless, and utterly unapologetic. "What did you expect, Amelia?" he had sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Did you really think I would be content with a passionless, sterile marriage forever? Kimberly gives me what you can't. She's exciting. She's alive." His words were like daggers, each one piercing her heart. She had given him everything, and he had thrown it back in her face. The divorce proceedings were a brutal, soul-crushing experience. Richard, with his high-powered legal team, was determined to leave her with nothing. He froze their joint bank accounts, cancelled her credit cards, and filed a petition to have her evicted from their home. He painted her as a mentally unstable, emotionally volatile woman, using her grief and heartbreak against her. He twisted her every word, her every action to fit his narrative. He was a master manipulator, and Amelia, in her shattered state, was no match for him. The day of the court hearing, Amelia felt a sense of numb resignation. She had fought as hard as she could, but she knew she was going to lose. Richard had all the power, all the resources. He had already won. And then Kimberly had walked into the courtroom, wearing her dress. The final cruel twist of the knife. It was a calculated move, designed to humiliate her, to break her completely. And it had almost worked. As she sat in the courtroom, listening to the judge begin to read the verdict, a part of her had already given up. She had closed her eyes, ready for the final blow. But then the courtroom doors had opened, and Alexander Sterling had walked in. Alexander. Her Alex. The boy she had loved with all the fierce, unbridled passion of her youth. They had been inseparable in college, two idealistic dreamers who believed they could change the world. They had planned a future together, a life filled with art and love and adventure. But life had gotten in the way. A family tragedy had forced Alexander to drop out of college and move to the other side of the world. They had promised to stay in touch, but the letters had become less frequent, the phone calls shorter. Eventually the silence had stretched into years, and Amelia, with a broken heart, had moved on. She had never forgotten him, though. He was a ghost in the back of her mind, a reminder of a life she could have had. And now he was here in the flesh, a man who looked at her with the same intensity she remembered from all those years ago. His words to the judge echoed in her ears, a lifeline thrown to her in the midst of her drowning despair. "I am the rightful owner of everything Mr. Donovan claims as his own." It was a preposterous claim, an impossible twist in an already unbelievable story. But as Amelia looked at the stunned ashen face of her husband, a flicker of hope, the first she had felt in months, ignited in her heart. Perhaps her life wasn't over after all. Perhaps it was just beginning. Kimberly Sinclair was a creature born of ambition and desperation. She hadn't always been the polished, predatory woman who now sat beside Richard Donovan, a stolen dress her armor, and a triumphant smirk her weapon. Her story began in a small, forgotten town in the Midwest, a place where dreams went to die, and the only escape was a one-way bus ticket. Her father was a man with a heavy hand and a thirst for cheap whiskey. Her mother, a woman worn down by years of broken promises and faded hopes. Kimberly had learned early on that the only person she could rely on was herself. She was smart, beautiful, and possessed a chameleon-like ability to become whatever people wanted her to be. She had clawed her way out of poverty, working 2 jobs to put herself through community college, her eyes fixed on the glittering prize of a life far away from the dust and despair of her childhood. She moved to the city with a fierce determination to succeed, to erase the shame of her past and reinvent herself as a woman of power and influence. Her first job was as a receptionist at a small, struggling brokerage firm. It was there that she first laid eyes on Richard Donovan. He was a rising star, a man with a magnetic charisma and a ruthless ambition that mirrored her own. She saw in him a kindred spirit, a fellow traveler on the path to power. She made it her mission to get his attention. She studied him, learned his habits, his likes and dislikes. She became the perfect assistant, anticipating his every need, her efficiency and intelligence making her indispensable. She was a master of subtle seduction. Her compliments always perfectly timed her touch, lingering just a moment too long. It didn't take long for Richard to notice her. He was flattered by her attention, captivated by her youthful energy and her unabashed admiration. He was a man who craved adoration, and Kimberly provided it in abundance. Their affair began with stolen glances and secret lunches, a thrilling, illicit dance that quickly escalated into a passionate, all-consuming obsession. Kimberly knew he was married, but she didn't care. Amelia was just a casualty of war, a necessary sacrifice on her path to the life she deserved. Kimberly was a shrewd strategist. She knew that to secure her position, she had to not only win Richard's heart, but also dismantle his marriage. She played on his insecurities, his fears of growing old and irrelevant. She whispered poison in his ear, painting Amelia as a cold, passionless woman who didn't appreciate him, who was holding him back. "She doesn't understand you, Richard," she would murmur, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "She doesn't see the brilliant, powerful man you are. But I do." She was a master of manipulation, carefully orchestrating situations to make Amelia look bad. She would accidentally send a flirtatious text to Richard's phone when she knew Amelia would see it. She would leave a lipstick-stained glass on his desk for Amelia to find. She was playing a dangerous game, but she was confident she would win. The divorce was her endgame. She coached Richard on what to say, how to act. She helped him and his lawyers build their case against Amelia, providing them with carefully selected evidence of Amelia's supposed profligacy and instability. Wearing Amelia's dress to court was her masterstroke, a final audacious act of dominance. It was a declaration of her victory, a symbol of her complete and utter triumph. She wanted to see Amelia broken, to watch her crumble under the weight of her public humiliation. She had savored the look of despair on Amelia's face as the judge began to read the verdict. She had squeezed Richard's hand, a triumphant smile on her lips. They had done it. They had won. But then the man had walked in. Alexander Sterling. Kimberly had never heard the name before, but the look of pure, unadulterated terror on Richard's face told her everything she needed to know. This man was a threat, a serious one. His claim to own everything Richard possessed was ludicrous, a desperate last-minute bluff. But the judge, intrigued by the unexpected drama, had granted a temporary stay of proceedings, ordering an emergency hearing to investigate Sterling's claims. The ride back to the penthouse was silent and tense. The triumphant mood had evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating cloud of fear. "Who is he?" Richard Kimberly finally demanded, her voice sharp as glass. Richard was pale and sweating, his usual confident swagger gone. "He's no one. He's a ghost." "He didn't look like a ghost to me," she snapped. "He looked like a man who owns the world. And he claims to own you." Richard finally cracked his voice, a desperate whisper. "It was a long time ago, Kimberly. Before you. Before everything." He told her the story, the words tumbling out of him in a torrent of fear and regret. He had been a young, struggling broker, desperate to make a name for himself. He had met Alexander Sterling, a brilliant, eccentric young man with a genius for predicting the market. Alexander had taken Richard under his wing, mentored him, trusted him. They had started a small investment fund together with Alexander, providing the capital and the strategy, and Richard handling the day-to-day operations. The fund was a phenomenal success, their initial investment multiplying 1,000-fold in just a few years. But Richard had grown greedy. He saw the immense wealth they were accumulating, and he wanted it all for himself. He had devised a plan, a complex web of shell corporations and fraudulent transactions to systematically siphon the money out of the fund and into his own private accounts. He had betrayed his friend, his mentor, the man who had given him his start. He had left Alexander with nothing, believing he had gotten away with it. He had built his entire empire on a foundation of lies and theft. Kimberly listened, her mind racing. This changed everything. Her entire future, the life she had fought so hard for, was built on stolen money. If Sterling could prove his claims, Richard would be ruined. And so would she. But Kimberly Sinclair was not a woman who gave up easily. She had come too far, fought too hard to let it all be taken away from her. "We fight," she said, her voice low and determined. "We fight him with everything we've got. We deny everything. We say he's a liar, a fraud. We destroy him." She was a cornered animal, and she was ready to do whatever it took to survive. She had played the game of manipulation and deceit to get what she wanted, and she was not about to let a ghost from Richard's past unravel her carefully constructed world. The battle for the Donovan fortune was about to begin, and Kimberly Sinclair was ready for war. She had clawed her way up from nothing, and she would be damned if she was going back. She would lie, cheat, and steal to protect her position. She had done it before, and she would do it again. She was a survivor, and she would survive this, whatever the cost. The name Alexander Sterling was whispered in the hallowed halls of international finance, with a mixture of awe and fear. He was a phantom, a myth, a man who had built a global empire from the ashes of a devastating betrayal. He was a recluse, a man who valued his privacy above all else, his face rarely seen, his voice rarely heard. But those who knew him, the select few who had earned his trust, knew the story behind the legend. They knew about the boy who had lost everything, the young man who had been left for dead, by the one person he had called a friend. Alexander's vow of revenge had been forged in the crucible of that betrayal. He had been a young, idealistic genius, a man who saw the world not in terms of dollars and cents, but as a complex, beautiful puzzle waiting to be solved. He had a gift, an uncanny ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos. The financial markets were his playground, a symphony of numbers that he could conduct with effortless grace. He had met Richard Donovan in a crowded coffee shop, a chance encounter that would alter the course of both their lives. Richard was ambitious and charming, with a hunger for success that Alexander, in his youthful naivety, had mistaken for passion. He had seen a kindred spirit, a partner to help him bring his revolutionary ideas to life. He had trusted Richard completely. He had given him everything: his ideas, his money, his friendship. He had been the architect, the visionary, while Richard was the builder, the one who would execute their shared dream. The betrayal, when it came, was swift and brutal. Richard, consumed by a greed that Alexander had failed to see, had systematically dismantled their empire, stealing not only the money, but also Alexander's identity, his future. He had vanished without a trace, leaving Alexander with nothing but the bitter taste of deceit and a mountain of debt. The years that followed were a living hell. Alexander was hounded by creditors, his name dragged through the mud. He lost everything: his home, his reputation, his faith in humanity. He was a ghost, a man erased from his own life story. But in the depths of his despair, a new resolve was born. He would not be defeated. He would not let Richard Donovan win. He would rebuild his life not for the sake of wealth or power, but for the sake of justice. He would reclaim what was rightfully his, and he would make Richard pay for his sins. He had started again from scratch with nothing but his brilliant mind and an unquenchable breathtaking in his soul. He worked tirelessly, relentlessly, his singular focus on his ultimate goal. He built a new empire, a fortress of wealth and power, so vast and impenetrable that it dwarfed anything Richard Donovan had ever dreamed of. He had kept a close watch on Richard over the years, tracking his rise, his marriage to Amelia, his decadent lifestyle. He had waited patiently for the perfect moment to strike. He was a predator stalking his prey, his vengeance, a dish best served cold. He had learned about the divorce, about Richard's cruel and calculated campaign to destroy Amelia. He had seen the public notice for the court hearing, and he knew that his moment had finally come. He had not seen Amelia since college, but he had never forgotten her. She was a luminous memory, a symbol of a life he could have had, a life that Richard had stolen from him. He remembered her kindness, her intelligence, her quiet strength. He knew that she was the innocent victim in Richard's web of deceit, and he was determined to save her. Seeing her in the courtroom, so pale and defeated, had ignited a protective fury in him. And seeing the woman beside Richard, wearing a dress that he knew instinctively must have belonged to Amelia, had solidified his resolve. His entrance into the courtroom was a declaration of war. His claim to own everything Richard possessed was not a bluff. It was the simple, unvarnished truth. He had the evidence, the meticulously documented proof of Richard's theft, a paper trail that would lead directly to his downfall. The emergency hearing was set for the following week. It would be a battle of titans, a clash of empires, built on a foundation of friendship and betrayal. Alexander and his legal team, a formidable group of the best lawyers money could buy, worked around the clock preparing their case. They compiled a mountain of evidence, bank records, forged documents, sworn affidavits from former employees who had witnessed Richard's fraudulent activities. But Alexander knew that this was more than just a legal battle. It was a psychological one. He knew Richard, his weaknesses, his fears. He knew that Richard was a coward, a man who would crumble under pressure. He arranged a meeting with Amelia. He wanted to see her, to talk to her, to prepare her for the storm that was about to break. They met in a private suite at a luxury hotel, a neutral ground far away from the prying eyes of the media. Amelia was nervous, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of tea. "I don't understand, Alexander," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "How can you own everything Richard built his company from the ground up?" Alexander looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, long-buried sadness. "Richard didn't build anything, Amelia. He stole it. He stole it from me." He told her the whole story, from the very beginning. He spared her no detail, laying bare the full extent of Richard's treachery. Amelia listened, her initial disbelief giving way to a sickening sense of horror. The life she had known, the man she had loved, was a lie. Her entire marriage had been built on a foundation of stolen money and deceit. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She had been a fool, a blind, trusting fool. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" she asked, her voice choked with tears. "I had to be patient," he said, his voice gentle. "I had to wait for the right moment. I had to be strong enough to fight him and win. For both of us." He reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm and steady, a comforting anchor in the swirling chaos of her emotions. "I'm going to destroy him, Amelia," he said, his voice low and intense. "I'm going to take back everything he stole from me, and I'm going to make sure that he can never hurt you or anyone else ever again." In his eyes, she saw not just a desire for revenge, but a deep, unwavering commitment to justice. She saw the boy she had once loved, the idealistic dreamer now, a man of immense power and unwavering resolve. For the first time in a long time, Amelia felt a glimmer of something more than just hope. She felt a surge of strength, a newfound determination to fight for her future. She was no longer the victim. She was a survivor. And with Alexander by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The battle was far from over, but for the first time she believed that she could win. The week leading up to the emergency hearing was a maelstrom of legal maneuvering and psychological warfare. The story had exploded in the media, a salacious tale of a jilted wife, a cheating husband, a glamorous mistress, and a mysterious billionaire. The names Donovan and Sterling were on the lips of every news anchor and gossip columnist in the city. Richard and Kimberly were holed up in their penthouse, the walls of their gilded cage closing in on them. The initial bravado had evaporated, replaced by a gnawing, ever-present fear. Richard, usually so suave and in control, was a nervous wreck pacing the floors like a caged animal, his face pale and drawn. Kimberly, on the other hand, was a coiled spring of desperate energy. She had taken charge, her survival instincts kicking into high gear. She was on the phone constantly berating their lawyers, spinning stories to the press, and trying to dig up any dirt she could find on Alexander Sterling. But Sterling was a ghost. His past was a carefully guarded fortress. His present, a web of impenetrable corporate entities. There was nothing to find, no weakness to exploit. The pressure was taking its toll on their relationship. The passionate affair that had been built on stolen moments and shared ambition was crumbling under the weight of their impending doom. Their conversations were laced with accusations and recriminations, their nights filled with sleepless, anxiety-ridden silences. "This is your fault," Richard Kimberly hissed at him one evening, her voice sharp with a venomous fury. You and your pathetic secrets. You've ruined everything." "My fault," he shot back, his voice cracking with a desperate rage. "You were the one who pushed for this divorce, who wanted to bleed Amelia dry. You were the one who wore her dress to court, for God's sake. Did you really think there would be no consequences?" Their love affair, once a source of thrilling illicit pleasure, had become a toxic, suffocating prison. They were two rats trapped on a sinking ship, and they were starting to turn on each other. Meanwhile, Amelia was in a different world altogether. She had moved into a suite at a discreet luxury hotel, a sanctuary provided by Alexander. A world away from the media frenzy and the painful memories of her old life. She spent her days with Alexander and his legal team, poring over the evidence, preparing for the hearing. For the first time, she saw the full scope of Richard's deception, the meticulous, cold-blooded way he had planned and executed his betrayal of Alexander. It was a sobering, painful education, but it was also empowering. The more she learned, the more her own strength grew. The timid, broken woman who had sat in the courtroom just a week ago was gone, replaced by a woman with a steely resolve and a newfound sense of purpose. She found herself drawn to Alexander, to his quiet strength, his unwavering determination. There was an unspoken bond between them, a shared history of betrayal by the same man. They were two survivors, two souls who had been irrevocably scarred by Richard Donovan's greed. The night before the hearing, Alexander took her to dinner at a small, secluded restaurant, a place where they could talk without being overheard. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "I'm nervous," she admitted, "but I'm not afraid. Not anymore." "You have nothing to be afraid of, Amelia," he said, his voice soft. "The truth is on our side." He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "I know this has been an ordeal for you, and I'm sorry that you've been dragged into this." "Don't be," she said, her voice firm. "I needed to know the truth. I needed to see Richard for who he really is." She paused, then added, "Thank you, Alexander, for everything. You saved me." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "We're saving each other." The day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed to the rafters. The air was electric with anticipation. This was the moment of truth, the final showdown between the two men whose lives had been so inextricably intertwined. Richard and Kimberly sat at the defendant's table, a picture of strained unity. Bartholomew, their lawyer, looked flustered, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a nervous energy. Amelia sat beside Alexander, a quiet confidence radiating from her. She met Richard's gaze across the courtroom, her expression unreadable. He flinched, looking away, unable to meet her steady, unwavering stare. Alexander's lead counsel, a formidable woman named Evelyn Reed, opened the proceedings with a calm, methodical precision. She laid out their case piece by piece, presenting a mountain of irrefutable evidence that chronicled Richard's systematic theft of the sterling Donovan fund. She presented bank statements showing massive transfers of funds into shell corporations, controlled by Richard. She presented forged documents with Alexander's signature clumsily replicated. She presented sworn testimony from a former accountant who had been coerced by Richard into helping him cook the books. The evidence was overwhelming, a tidal wave of truth that washed over the courtroom, drowning Richard and his lies in its wake. Bartholomew's attempts to rebut the evidence were weak and unconvincing. He tried to paint Alexander as a disgruntled former partner, a man with a vendetta. But his arguments were flimsy, his bluster ringing hollow in the face of the cold, hard facts. The final devastating blow came when Evelyn Reed called Richard to the stand. He was a man, broken his face, ashen, his hands trembling. He stumbled through his testimony, his lies unraveling with every question. Evelyn Reed was relentless, her questions sharp and incisive, peeling away the layers of his deceit until he was left exposed and vulnerable. A pathetic, cornered man with nowhere left to hide. "Mr. Donovan," she said, her voice like ice, "did you or did you not forge Mr. Sterling's signature on these documents?" Richard looked at the documents, then at Alexander, then at Amelia. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was a man, drowning the weight of his own lies, pulling him under. In that moment, Kimberly knew it was over. She looked at the pathetic, broken man beside her, the man she had hitched her future to, and she felt nothing but contempt. He was a loser, a fraud, and he was taking her down with him. She made a decision, a cold, calculated decision born of a lifetime of self-preservation. She scribbled a note on a piece of paper and passed it to her lawyer. He read it, his eyes widening in surprise. He whispered something to Bartholomew, who looked at Kimberly with a mixture of shock and admiration. Bartholomew rose to his feet. "Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound confidence, "my client, Miss Sinclair, has some information that will be of great interest to the court. She is prepared to testify against Mr. Donovan in exchange for full immunity." The courtroom erupted. Richard stared at Kimberly, his eyes wide with disbelief and betrayal. She refused to look at him, her gaze fixed on the judge, her expression a mask of cold, hard resolve. Kimberly Sinclair had made her final move. She was a survivor, and she would do whatever it took to save herself, even if it meant burying Richard Donovan once and for all. Kimberly Sinclair took the stand not in the stolen Dior dress, but in a simple, modest black suit. She was no longer the triumphant mistress, but a woman wronged, a victim of Richard Donovan's deceit. It was a masterful performance, a final desperate gambit to save herself from the sinking ship of Richard's empire. Her voice, once a saccharine melody, was now filled with a carefully rehearsed tremor of fear and regret. She told the court that she had been blinded by love, a naive young woman swept off her feet by a charming, manipulative man. She claimed that she had known nothing of his fraudulent activities, that he had lied to her just as he had lied to everyone else. But she was a shrewd negotiator. Her testimony was not a full confession. It was a carefully curated selection of half-truths and strategic omissions designed to incriminate Richard while minimizing her own culpability. She provided the court with a key piece of evidence that she had been holding back a secret ledger she had discovered in Richard's home office, a detailed record of his illegal transactions, his hidden offshore accounts, his entire web of deceit. It was the final nail in Richard's coffin. He sat at the defendant's table, a broken man listening as the woman he had loved, the woman for whom he had thrown away his marriage, systematically dismantled the last vestiges of his life. He looked at her, his eyes pleading, but she wouldn't meet his gaze. She was a stranger to him now, a cold, ruthless woman he had never really known. The judge's verdict was swift and decisive. Richard Donovan was found guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and a string of other financial crimes. His assets were frozen. His empire seized his life as he knew it over. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, a once powerful man, now a common criminal. His face a mask of disbelief and despair. He was a king who had lost his kingdom, a man who had flown too close to the sun and had been burned by his own hubris. Kimberly, having been granted immunity for her testimony, walked out of the courtroom a free woman. But her victory was a hollow one. She had saved herself from prison, but she had lost everything else. Her reputation was in tatters, her name synonymous with scandal and betrayal. She was a pariah in the city she had fought so hard to conquer. She had survived, but she was alone, a ghost in the gilded cage she had so desperately craved. Amelia and Alexander watched the drama unfold from the sidelines, a quiet sense of closure settling over them. The battle was over. Justice had been served. In the weeks that followed, the full extent of Richard's crimes was revealed. The Donovan Empire, once a towering monument to wealth and power, was dismantled, its assets liquidated to pay back the creditors and investors Richard had swindled. Alexander, as the primary victim of Richard's fraud, reclaimed what was rightfully his, the vast fortune that had been stolen from him all those years ago. But the money meant little to him. It was the principle that mattered, the restoration of his name, the vindication of his honor. He and Amelia found themselves in a strange new world, a world free from the shadows of the past. The trauma of the divorce and the trial had forged a deep and unbreakable bond between them. They were two survivors, two souls who had found each other in the wreckage of their lives. They spent their days together, rediscovering the easy intimacy they had once shared, their old friendship, blossoming into something deeper, something more profound. They walked in the park, visited art galleries, and talked for hours, their conversations a gentle tapestry of shared memories and future dreams. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline, the glittering lights a testament to the new life that lay before them. Alexander turned to Amelia, his eyes serious. "I'm selling the company." "Amelia," he said. She looked at him surprised. "But you worked so hard to get it back." "I didn't get it back for the money," he said. "I got it back for justice. And now that justice has been served, I want to be free." He took her hand, his voice soft. "I want a different life, Amelia. A life filled with the things that truly matter. Art, travel, love. The things we used to dream about." He looked into her eyes, his heart in his. "I want that life with you." Amelia's heart swelled with a joy so intense it brought tears to her eyes. She had thought that her life was over, that she would never find love or happiness again. But here in the arms of the man who had saved her, she saw a future brighter than she had ever dared to imagine. She leaned in and kissed him. A kiss that was a promise, a new beginning, a testament to the enduring power of love and the resilience of the human spirit. They were two broken souls who had found solace in each other. Two survivors who were ready to leave the past behind and step into a future of their own making. The ghosts had been exorcised, the demons vanquished, the long night was finally over, and a new day was dawning. The sale of Sterling Enterprises was the biggest financial news of the year, a multi-billion-dollar deal that sent shockwaves through the global markets. Alexander Sterling, the phantom billionaire, the man who had come back from the dead to reclaim his empire, was cashing out, walking away from the world of high finance, as suddenly and mysteriously as he had re-entered it. The world speculated, but only Amelia knew the truth. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. It was the shedding of a skin, the closing of a painful chapter, and the opening of a brand new book, its pages pristine and waiting to be written. They left the city behind the concrete canyons and the ghosts of their past fading in the rearview mirror. They bought a villa on the sun-drenched coast of Italy, a sprawling, beautiful house with panoramic views of the Mediterranean Sea. It was a house filled with light and laughter, a world away from the gilded cage Amelia had once called home. Amelia, with Alexander's encouragement, rediscovered her passion for art. She converted one of the villa's large, airy rooms into a studio, its walls soon covered with canvases, vibrant with color and emotion. She painted with a freedom she hadn't felt in years, her grief, her anger, her joy, pouring onto the canvas in a torrent of creative energy. She started a small, exclusive gallery in a nearby town, a curated collection of works by emerging local artists. It was a passion project, a labor of love, a way to give back to the world of art that had always been her first love. She was no longer Mrs. Donovan, the perfect corporate wife. She was Amelia, the art curator, a woman of substance and vision, a woman in control of her own destiny. Alexander, for his part, reveled in his newfound freedom. He shed the weight of his past, the burden of his vow of revenge. He was no longer the phantom billionaire, the man driven by a singular, all-consuming purpose. He was just Alex, a man in love, a man who found joy in the simple pleasures of life, a walk on the beach, a good book, a home-cooked meal, shared with the woman he loved. He started a foundation, a philanthropic organization dedicated to supporting young, innovative entrepreneurs, the kind of idealistic dreamer he had once been. He wanted to give them the chance he had never had the opportunity to build their dreams on a foundation of trust and integrity, not deceit and betrayal. They traveled the world, not as tourists, but as explorers seeking out hidden gems and remote corners of the globe. They climbed mountains in Nepal, sailed the turquoise waters of the Caribbean, and got lost in the bustling markets of Marrakesh. They were two souls on a shared adventure, their love for each other the compass that guided them on their journey. One evening, as they sat on the terrace of their villa, a bottle of wine between them, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Amelia turned to Alexander, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked, her voice soft. Alexander knew who she meant. Richard, Kimberly, the ghosts of their past. Sometimes, he admitted. It's hard not to. Richard was serving a long prison sentence, his name now a cautionary tale in the annals of corporate greed. He had lost everything, his freedom, his fortune, his family. He was a man alone with his regrets. A king in a prison cell. His kingdom nothing but a distant memory. Kimberly had vanished from the public eye. There were rumors, whispers of her living a quiet, anonymous life in some forgotten corner of the world. Her beauty faded, her ambition extinguished. She was a ghost in a different kind of prison, a prison of her own making, haunted by the choices she had made and the life she had lost. "I don't hate them anymore," Amelia said, her voice filled with a quiet sense of peace. "I just feel sad for the lives they could have had, for the choices they made." Alexander took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "They made their choices, Amelia, and we've made ours." He looked at her, his heart filled with a love so profound it left him breathless. She was the most beautiful, resilient woman he had ever known. She had taken the shattered pieces of her life and had created a masterpiece, a life filled with beauty and passion and purpose. "I love you, Amelia," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you too, Alex," she said, her eyes shining with tears of joy. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky. The past was a closed book, its stories told, its lessons learned. The future was an open canvas, a vast and beautiful landscape waiting to be painted. and they would paint it together with the vibrant, beautiful colors of their love. They were home, they were free, and they were finally completely happy. The story of Amelia, Richard, and Alexander is more than just a tale of betrayal and revenge. It's a story about the incredible resilience of the human spirit, about the power of truth to shatter even the most carefully constructed lies. It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, when all hope seems lost, a new beginning is always possible. Amelia's journey from a heartbroken wife to a strong, independent woman is an inspiration to us all. If you were moved by her story, if you believe in the power of second chances, then please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to our channel for more real-life dramas that will touch your heart and soul. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thank you for listening.